I've done a lot of dumb things in my life because I'm stubborn, and I don't want to be a burden to other people is how I think of it sometimes. And so I'm like, well, I don't want to ask for help. I'll just do it myself. And it's gotten me into trouble so many times. I've hurt myself. Been in the emergency room for it. I don't learn. I guess I'm hard-headed too. I don't learn well. A few years ago, like 10 years ago, I was putting up Christmas lights, and my kids were young enough to really want me to put up Christmas lights. And we had a new house, and the new house had one of those really high peaks. Like, it had the normal garage level, which I could get to pretty much just because I'm tall. But the peak top was really high. And my ladder was like an A-frame and wouldn't get up that high. And so I borrowed my dad's pickup. I didn't have a pickup at the time. I borrowed my dad's pickup, and I didn't tell him what I was doing, I don't think. And I put the A-frame in the back of the pickup, and I backed up to the house. So I'm on an A-frame on the rung that says don't step on this or above. I'm on that one, right? Kind of riding it like a cowboy. And I'm trying to hang, and I just can't reach the peak to put the clip in. And I about lose the whole thing. And I didn't fall. I didn't die that time. But I decided not to do that anymore after that because I believe Wendy saw it and was like, what is wrong with you? And I've done so many things like that in my life where I've tried to just wail on it. Does that make sense? Like, just try to wail on it a little bit, and that'll fix it surely. And that does not fix it usually. And so, like, this guy doing this, it kind of reminds me of, like, when I would, like, haul something in a truck, and you like, put your hand out the window, and you're like, oh, I can hold this mattress down. I got this, right? I don't ever know what I'm thinking when I do these things. I've not done this specific one. I did attempt to load a lawnmower in the back of a pickup by myself, a riding lawnmower once, and got about halfway up and was like, I'm going to need some help, like I need a spotter. And I've done a lot of silly things like that I've paid for later. But I feel like this, and I know I need a team. There's a reason they print team lift on those boxes, but I know I need help, but I'm like, oh, it's just quicker or easier, or I don't want to bother anyone. And so just try to do it yourself. Can you relate to that? Have you ever tried to be that person that's just like, oh, I'll get it. I don't need any help. I'll get it figured out. Well, I think sometimes what that really does is sets us up for failure because we are not built to do everything on our own. We're not built to be lone rangers. We are not built to do everything by ourselves. It might be faster. It might be easier, the path of least resistance. But in the end, many times we just fail because we refuse to involve others. The problems of our life, the fears that we face, the daily grind, all of it, if we try to handle it solo like the Lone Ranger, it tends to build up. Some people will tell us, well, you got to be strong. You got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. But they reject the reality of all of those people that have developed great companies or great families or raised great children, that they didn't do that in a vacuum, that there were many, many inputs and helps along the way, teams, and that's exhausting. Simple idea for today is that we weren't designed to go at life alone. It turns out the need for community, the need for belonging, the need for other people involved in our lives is the way we were created. We were created to be dependent on each other. If you notice, even the trends in architecture and urban planning has moved in this direction, reducing walk times, intentionally building community spaces where before they would just build wall-to-wall housing. Now they're like, no, that's very valuable real estate, but we need a park here. We need a space here, a green space. We need a space for a community garden. We need a space here where people can come together on a soccer field or a baseball field or a basketball court. The reality is God designed us this way, not to be completely apart from each other as hermits, but instead to interchangeably understand that we need one another. In fact, the author in Hebrews says it like this. He says, let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another. We were created to encourage one another. We were created to motivate one another. And I love what the end goal there is, which lines up pretty well with what Jesus said, which is our mission statement that Ben told you just a moment ago, to love God and do good. We are to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. Unfortunately, the temptation to be a lone wolf is a very strong cultural myth. It's very strong that cowboy movies and action-adventure movies. I mean, even my favorite action hero of all time, 007. How many times is he depending on his team? Oh, sure, he gets his gadgets at the beginning, right? But does he really ever think he needs anyone? No, he's the perfect spy. He doesn't need anyone else. He's just out there doing the work of the queen, and he doesn't need anyone else. And that's so unrealistic, right? Especially when you have him like cornered in a room and he's beating up all these people and you're like, yeah, he's amazing. But that wouldn't work in reality. They'd just rush him. It'd be over with. Or the bad guy leaves him on the table with the laser, right? And it's like, okay, that'll take care of itself, and turn around. And like, of course, he escapes every time. And so it's become so funny because it's like, that's just not reality. You can't do all this on your own. The self-made billionaire myth. Most of these people did not start out with nothing. They started out with something and great contacts and great family lineage of helpers and people helping them out. Or in the case of Apple, stealing ideas, straight out stealing ideas from other companies. I mean, even the Apple operating system really wasn't an Apple creation originally. The Xerox company had already made a click and drag interface. They just saw that on a tour and were like, good idea. Let's go do that better. I mean, that's fine, but we've got to get out of the mythology that all these things have just happened magically on their own and realize that these things build on each other, and people have used teams to come to these things and got amazing things done with teamwork, not lone rangers. But we worship the outcomes. So many times we worship the outcomes. We look at the outcome and go, whew, it'd be nice to have all that, or it'd be nice to be set up that way, or it'd be nice to have that physical outcome or that economic outcome. It would be nice to be like that. And we don't respect the teamwork that it takes to get to some of those outcomes, those great feats. I was reading some research, and if you want to look this up, you can. Two psychologists did this work in the late 90s. It is very extensive, their actual reporting on this, but I pulled out of the, when you read research and it has like that abstract. So basically I pulled this quote out of their closing part of their conclusions of their abstract. And this is what they came to. Their research was looking at community and how it impacts the psyche. And they said belonging to a community is linked to higher levels of self-esteem and a stronger sense of purpose, leading to an overall happier life. And I think when I read that, I was like, well, duh. I mean, yeah, of course. That's not something that's really complicated to understand. But the reality is we disconnect from that in so many ways that we need sometimes research to show that, to go, hey, wake up. Community is really healthy for you. And the opposite of that, disconnecting from community, is really unhealthy for you. It leads to higher levels of self-esteem or self-worth, stronger senses of purposeness, and an overall happier life, which if you're not aware, most research indicates that we are all on little happiness journeys. We are all on our individual happiness journeys. We are trying to maximize happiness and minimize pain and suffering. We're all on that together. Sometimes we don't understand how that works together in cohesion with others' happiness, but we are all, at least individually, on those little paths. And so we're all on this path for this same outcome. And this is something that we think about a lot, I think, as a church, is that we want this for other people. It's why we feed the homeless folks that are our friends. It's why we look for ways to alleviate pain and suffering with disaster relief. When those tornadoes came up and you all gave to that, and we sent that money out the next day on Monday morning, we were thinking about our neighbors and our friends who had just lost a lot. We wanted to alleviate suffering. We wanted to bring some sense of normalcy into those things. And so this is top of mind for us all the time. How can we alleviate pain and suffering, and how can we be a part of people experiencing greater happiness and joy? We believe that following Jesus is a better way of living. We don't believe it's just about the future outcomes, which it definitely is, but we believe it's about the here and now. It's for today. We believe that following Jesus leads to a more abundant, happy life. The pursuit of God and his things leads to more purpose, and leads to a higher self-esteem, and leads to understanding your Creator. We believe all of these things, and so these are what we want for your friends, for your neighbors, for your classmates, for our entire community, for each person that comes to be a part of this church. But we also recognize that that's not default for humanity. That's not the default setting. The reality is the default, the natural thing is to kind of turn inward and to try to do it all on ourselves and to really put shame and blame on ourselves when things don't work out right. And so how can we help people grow out of that and mature into understanding that having a team around you, having cheerleaders, having people to push you forward, to motivate you, to encourage you to good works and love, how do we make that transition? How do we grow each other in that way? I found a church that made a diagram, a pastor that did this in his church, and you know how terrible I am with drawing, so I stole this. Because I was like, he did a better job than I ever would. But he was talking about spiritual maturity, and then he kind of did this Venn diagram here with growth through knowledge, which we have talked about, and growth through serving, which we talk about, but then growth through connection, which is the focus today, and how these work in succession with one another. They work in sync with one another. It's not one or the other or just going deep into one. It's kind of understanding that they're all connected. And connection sometimes is one of the more difficult things. You know, if you rush out of church right after it's over and you never make a meaningful connection, you can feel disconnected from people, right? And I have people sometimes that will say, well, it's difficult for me to make friends. I'm like, of course it is, because the moment that I say, amen, you're just running out the door. I mean, you can't do that if you want to get to know people, right? The other side of that is it is uncomfortable sometimes. I know that. I'm an introvert. You may think that's odd for someone that gets up and has to talk in front of a group of people and someone that has to interact with lots of different kinds of people. But statistically, about 80% of us pastors are introverts. And a big part of that is we spend a lot of our time in our week in books. And now with electronic tools in mini books, right? So I have thousands of volumes at my keyboard. I can just type in a keyword and get thousands of books that I never owned before, but now own digitally. And so a lot of our time in the week, if you think of our work week, is pretty alone. It's pretty lonely kind of work. And then we push ourselves to be extroverts on Sundays a little bit. We push ourselves. And then Sunday afternoon for me looks like, get away from me. I'm going back into the darkness. Like I need time. I must recharge. Feels like a vampire. I got to recharge in the dark. And so that is kind of a thing. My batteries are depleted at the end of the day. And so you may be that kind of person, right? And think this is kind of scary to connect. But the reality is you are designed for that. Whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, or probably like most of us, somewhere in between those two extremes, maturity happens through knowledge, happens through your study, for sure. I know that for sure. And it happens through serving and through, sweat equity and giving and being generous with people. But you can't discount the connection part of that, because it is huge for what we're talking about today. Knowledge, as we talk about it in Colossians, is this idea that God wants you to have this knowledge. He wants you to grow spiritually in this way. It says, we ask God to give you complete knowledge of his will, to give you spiritual wisdom and understanding. Then the way you live will always honor and please the Lord, and your lives will produce every kind of good fruit. Fruit here is once again that concept of good works, faith coming out of your life. So it's an expression of what God has done inside of you, but now people can see it. People can see fruit. As long as the apple tree holds the apples within inside itself, it's not producing fruit. You could say it's an apple tree, and it may be an apple tree, but until it produces an apple, we don't know that. Then when the apple comes out, we go, there's the fruit of that tree. In the same way, we can claim to know Christ, claim to follow Jesus, but until people begin to see that and experience that, we have not borne that fruit out. That's the kind of agricultural analogy that they're going with here. And it says, all the while you will grow as you learn to know God better and better. And this is our ultimate vision and goal, is that each person that comes to this place, that gathers, that wants to be a coffee creaker, is on a journey. And we believe everyone's in motion. You're either moving closer to becoming like Jesus or moving further away from him. There's not really a stasis in there. There's no chamber that just kind of lets you freeze yourself for a while. You're kind of constantly in motion. And so whether you're making massive strides and leaps, or you're so busy at work or with life that you're just taking baby steps, isn't really the point. The point is just constant motion forward. And if you're sliding or you're moving back away from that, is getting back on track and taking inventory so that at, a year, 5 years, a decade in, you're not concerned with where you are because you went so far off track. And so that's what church can be really good for, is this way to kind of help us as a community move back into the light, move back into the path of Jesus. I love what Helen Keller said. She said, alone we can do so little, but together we can do so much. I think that's true. I think it's true, and we discount that. But the reality is we are so much better together. What would it look like? Imagine if you had a cheering section for you. Imagine you had people that were calling you out, motivating you, encouraging you to do good works. Imagine you had people that were pushing you. Imagine you had people that are celebrating with you when it's time to celebrate, and they're there to listen to you and to encourage you through the difficult days, because both of those things are going to happen to all of us. We're all going to have great days that we need to go through a party, and we're all going to have terrible days that we need someone to listen to us. But the burdens being shared amplifies your growth. Whether you're the person helping someone else, that amplifies your growth, or you're being helped, your growth moves closer to being like Jesus, because Jesus was good about being there for those people that were hurting. And so it's not just good for you, it's good for everyone. The question then becomes, who are my people? And I think a lot of our life is spent on this. When we enter a business, I don't know if you've ever done this when you think about it, but when you enter a business and you look around and you're like, is there anyone like me here? And I know that I went into a really fancy coffee shop one time in Chicago, and I walked in and I walked out because I was like, there are no mid-40s dads here. This is a very hip spot, and I am very New Balance wearing 40s dad. And I was like, no, not for me, not for me. Plus, I think like a latte was like $12. I'm like, also, not for me, not for me. Where's the McDonald's? Where's the Starbucks? I've got a free one on my app. So, but if you notice that, we do that a lot. We try to self-identify when we walk in somewhere. We go, are these my people? And there's something in us that's always kind of doing that. Kind of, whether you're consciously aware of it or not, you're kind of constantly going, am I welcome here? Am I safe here? Would I be in a conversation with someone here? And some of you, you go to AutoZone and you're like, Graceland. You're really excited. You're happy. You're home. Some of you walk into Kohl's and you're just like, yeah. In both of those environments, I'm like, I want out of here as soon as possible. But Best Buy or Barnes & Noble, and I'm like, hello, nerds. We are here. Yes. I've arrived. Everybody ready? And some of you, that would you would be like chalk or nails on a chalkboard for you. You'd be like, I want out of here. Why does it smell so bad in here? I go into Barnes & Noble and I'm like, can I get a candle of this? I love this smell. New book, yes. With a little hint of caffeine and coffee in there. But some of you so we have definite places we like to go. We walk into and we're like, yeah, these are my people. Some of you walk into Lowe's or Home Depot and they're like trying to help you out and you're like, get away from me. I know where I'm going. Others, I asked for help the other day. I'm like, hey, where are the shop vacs? And they're like, we don't know. So don't even worry about asking for help there. But if you think about it, who are your people? This is a question that more than just subconsciously, I want you to really think about. And what steps are you taking towards creating that? I had a poster on my wall as a kid, and I've talked about this before, but it was a little puppy dog, cute little puppy dog. They used to make these at like book fairs and things. And it said, if you want a friend, be a friend. And it took me forever to learn that concept, that you really have to consider that. Who your people are is who you are being people to. You don't just fall into friends. It's difficult, and it's more difficult the older we get to make friends. It's not quite as easy, and we don't spend as much time thinking about it. So who are your people? And who are you building, and who are you letting build you up? Ecclesiastes is the final kind of part I wanted to share with you today, and it says that two people are better off than one, for they can help each other succeed. And so Old Testament, New Testament today, these concepts are aligned across what we call the systematic theology of the Bible. It is not just one verse out of context that is talking about this. Multiple times in the New Testament and the Old Testament, the idea is connected together that community is important. If one person falls, the writer says in Ecclesiastes, the other can reach out and help, but someone who falls alone is in real trouble. So this verse highlights the practical benefits of community. It highlights the support and encouragement. Ultimately, we weren't designed to go it alone. And so I want to encourage you to commit to whatever this looks like for you. And I'll send you out some ideas this week by email. I'll send you out some ideas of how you might do this, because there's not just one way, right, to do this. You can do large community, you can do smaller community, but knowing and being known is really, really important. And so I want to give you some ideas this week. It's not weakness to say, I can't figure all this out on my own. It's wisdom. Hear that. It's not weakness to know that you need community. It's wisdom. It's ignorance to try, and it's futile to try to do it on your own when God has provided community for you. And at Coffee Creek, that's what we want to create a space for. Now, I'm from a very small town growing up, very small church. I graduated with a class of 20. You know, I watched graduation at Deer Creek on the TV yesterday, and I was like, oh my word, are they ever going to get through these names? And they finally got to the W and the Z's, and I was like, get it done. And, my graduation was like 30 minutes because there was 20 of us, and I think half of it was the speech I was giving. So it was a very short ceremony compared to the hours and hours that our big schools have up here. But Coffee Creek is kind of wanting to be that lighthouse in the middle of a sea or an ocean of people, where we create space for community. We create time. We create physical space. We create opportunity to slow down and to recognize that we are not in this life alone, that there are others on a similar journey, and there are others that are struggling, and there are others that are succeeding in the moment. And whether we're somewhere at one of those spectrums or in between, we can be with each other and not have to be lone rangers. Henry Nouwen's one of my favorite authors. He said, community is where humility and glory touch. These ideas come together.